Sarah Collins pressed her back against the limestone outcropping, feeling the stone's accumulated heat through her torn calico dress. The canteen at her hip had been empty since yesterday morning, and the metallic taste coating her mouth spoke of a body beginning to surrender to the borderlands. She had been walking for 4 days now. The wagon train had left her when the wheel broke and her husband took fever. Wait for the next group, they had said. But Sarah knew better than to trust the promises of strangers when Apache raids made every day a gamble with death. The $47 sewn into her corset had bought passage from San Antonio, but money meant nothing when buzzards circled overhead and her husband lay buried beneath stones she had stacked with her own bleeding hands. Her only remaining possession of value was the gold locket her mother had given her, a wedding gift that now seemed like a relic from someone else's life. Inside was a daguerreotype of her sister Margaret in Boston, standing beside the schoolhouse where she taught children to read and write. Margaret had written faithfully for 2 years, begging Sarah to come east, away from the rough territories where civilization was still more hope than reality. But Boston felt as distant as the moon now. Sarah closed her eyes and listened to the desert's conversations, the whisper of wind through sage, the distant cry of a hawk, the subtle shift of sand against stone. In Pennsylvania, where she'd grown up, the world was full of church bells and factory whistles, the sounds of people living ordered lives within sight of their neighbors. Here, silence had weight and presence, pressing down on her chest like a living thing that measured her worth in heartbeats. Her husband's Bible, wrapped in oilcloth and tucked inside her carpet bag, had become too heavy to carry. She had left it beside his grave along with the broken pieces of their dreams. James had been so certain that California gold would solve all their troubles, that the stories of fortunes waiting to be plucked from streams were more than desperate men's lies. Now he lay beneath desert stones while she continued westward out of nothing more than stubborn refusal to die in the same place. The sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the landscape in shades of copper and rust. Soon, the desert would transform from furnace to ice house, and Sarah knew she wouldn't survive another night exposed to the elements. Her body had already begun the slow process of surrender, hands trembling, vision blurring, thoughts scattered like tumbleweeds in wind. She thought of the letter from Margaret, the last one to reach her before James had dragged her away from everything safe and familiar. "There's a position here at the school," Margaret had written. "Teaching pays $25 a month, and you could board with the pastor's widow. Please consider it, Sarah. This territory will break you if you let it." How right her sister had been. "No one's coming for me," she whispered to the empty sky, her voice barely more than breath against the endless silence. But the desert, as always, was listening. 2 miles north, Miguel Vasquez crouched beside a boot print pressed deep in the hardpan, studying the gait and depth with patience learned from his Apache grandfather. The track belonged to someone small, walking slow, dragging their right foot slightly. He placed his palm beside the print, a woman's button-up boot, well made but worn thin at the sole. Miguel had been scouting for the cavalry for 6 years now, long enough to read the borderlands stories written in bent grass and disturbed stones. His mixed heritage gave him advantages that the soldiers respected but never fully understood: the ability to see patterns where others saw chaos, to sense danger in apparent emptiness, to follow trails that existed more in instinct than evidence. But lately, the work had begun wearing on him in ways that government wages couldn't compensate. His orders were simple: track down Apache raiders and report their movements to the fort. The territory was crawling with cavalry patrols trying to round up the last of Geronimo's followers, and every set of tracks could mean the difference between peace and another massacre. But this woman's trail told a different story, not of warriors seeking battle, but of someone alone and desperate in country that killed the unprepared without conscience. He stood slowly, feeling the familiar ache in his back from years of desert walking. At 35, he moved with the deliberate economy of someone who had learned to read his environment before it read him. His Apache grandfather would have called it walking in balance, understanding that survival meant becoming part of the landscape rather than fighting against it. The woman's trail led southeast, toward the rough country where flash floods had carved deep arroyos and left behind a maze of limestone and thorns. Dangerous territory, even for someone healthy and well-supplied. For someone traveling alone and on foot, it was a death sentence waiting to be carried out by exposure, thirst, or simple misfortune. Miguel checked his supplies. 2 full canteens, jerky, hardtack, and a wool blanket rolled behind his saddle. His bay mare stood patient and alert, trained to ground tie while he worked. Standard procedure was to report any civilian tracks to the commanding officer and let the cavalry handle rescue operations. But something about this particular trail spoke to him in ways that military protocol couldn't address. His grandfather had been a scout for the Mexican Army back when the boundaries between nations mattered less than the boundaries between life and death. The old man had told stories about reading the land's intentions, about understanding when the desert was ready to claim someone and when it might still be willing to give them back. La tierra recuerda todo, he used to say. The earth remembers everything, especially the forgotten ones. Miguel didn't reach for his field glasses to signal the fort. He had learned long ago that some decisions couldn't be explained in official reports, that there were obligations older and more binding than the ones written in army manuals. The woman's trail called to something deeper than duty or orders. It called to the part of him that remembered when helping strangers wasn't a policy decision, but simply what decent people did for each other in harsh country. The sun was beginning its slide toward evening, and temperatures would plummet once darkness fell. If the woman was still alive, she wouldn't be for much longer without intervention. Miguel mounted his horse and began following the trail with the focused intensity of someone who understood that time was running out against him. Each hoof print told him more about her condition, the shortened stride indicating exhaustion, the occasional stumble marks suggesting delirium, the increasingly erratic path revealing someone who no longer trusted her own navigation. She was close to the end, but endings could be rewritten if someone arrived at the right moment with the right intentions. The desert wind picked up as he rode, carrying scents of creosote and dust and something else that made him urge his horse faster, despite years of careful training. His grandfather would have recognized the smell immediately. It was the scent of someone preparing to surrender. But Miguel Vasquez had not spent 35 years learning the borderland's secrets just to let another story end in unmarked graves and unread letters. Not if he could help it. Sarah's vision had begun betraying her, transforming shadows into people and rocks into shelter that dissolved when she tried to reach them. The gold locket at her throat had grown warm against her skin, and she found herself touching it without conscious thought. A talisman that connected her to a world where women died in beds surrounded by family instead of alone among thorns and stones. She had stopped walking an hour ago, not from choice, but from necessity. Her legs simply refused to carry her any further, trembling with exhaustion and the peculiar lightness that came before complete collapse. The limestone outcropping offered some protection from the sun, now hanging low and merciless in the western sky, but she knew it was only postponing what seemed inevitable. Her mind drifted to the morning she had said goodbye to Margaret, promising to write from California once James struck gold. Her sister had made her breakfast, eggs and biscuits with honey butter, and neither of them had spoken about what might go wrong on the trail. But the silence between them had been full of understanding and unspoken fears. "You don't have to follow him west," Margaret had said quietly. "He's my husband. He's a dreamer chasing fool's gold." But loyalty was loyalty, even when it led to graves in unnamed places and regrets that couldn't be undone. Now there would be no letters from California, no stories of gold strikes and new beginnings. There would only be this place where borders meant nothing and dreams came to die among the sage and stones. The sound reached her before she saw him. Hoofbeats that moved with purpose across terrain that had defeated her completely. Sarah tried to call out, but her voice emerged as barely a whisper. She had heard stories of cavalry patrols, some merciful and others cruel, but she no longer had the strength to run even if she wanted to. A shadow fell across her vision, and she looked up to see a man on horseback silhouetted against the fading light. He was not wearing the blue uniform she expected, but simple range clothes. Leather vest, cotton shirt, hat pulled low against the glare. His face was weathered and intelligent, with dark eyes that seemed to understand things without needing them explained. "Ma'am," he said quietly, dismounting with fluid grace. "My name is Miguel. I've been tracking you." Sarah tried to speak, but managed only a sound somewhere between relief and despair. Rescue seemed like such an impossible concept now, like asking for the sun to shine cooler or the stones to grow softer. She shook her head weakly. "No one's coming for me," she whispered, the words barely audible above the desert wind. Miguel approached slowly, moving with the careful patience of someone accustomed to dealing with frightened creatures. Up close, she could see the intelligence in his dark eyes, the competence that came from years of reading signs and making decisions that mattered. He unslung a canteen from his saddle and knelt beside her. "Let's start with this," he said, holding the canteen to her cracked lips. The water was warm but tasted like salvation itself. Sarah took small sips as Miguel watched, his calloused hand steady beneath hers to guide the flow. She wanted to drink it all at once, but he wouldn't let her, pulling it away gently after each swallow. "Slow," he said. "We have time now." Time. The word seemed almost foreign after 4 days of racing against the desert's patience. Sarah closed her eyes and felt tears cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. When she opened them again, Miguel was studying her with the same careful attention he might give to reading weather or tracking game. "You're hurt," he observed, noting how she favored her right foot. "Since yesterday, stepped in a prairie dog hole." He nodded as if this explained everything that mattered. From his saddlebags, he produced a small kit and began examining her injury with gentle, competent hands. His touch was professional but somehow personal too, as if her pain had become his responsibility in ways that went beyond chance encounter or common decency. "What's your name?" he asked as he worked. "Sarah Collins. Mrs. James Collins." The title felt strange now, hollow as a broken promise. "Where were you headed, Mrs. Collins?" "California, but my husband, he died 4 days back. Fever." The words came out broken, interrupted by exhaustion and the bitter taste of collapsed dreams. Miguel finished wrapping her ankle with strips of cloth and sat back on his heels. The sun had nearly disappeared behind the mountains now, painting the desert in shades of purple and gold that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Soon the temperature would begin its nightly plunge toward freezing. "We need to get you somewhere warm," he said. "Can you ride if I help you up?" Sarah looked at him, really looked, and saw something in his expression that made her chest tight with an emotion she couldn't name. It wasn't pity or duty or professional obligation. It was something more personal, as if her survival had become important to him in ways that couldn't be explained by civilized convention or Christian charity. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Miguel was quiet for a long moment, his eyes focused on the darkening horizon where the last light was fading from the sky. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of choices made and unmade. "Because someone should," he said simply, and reached out his hand. Miguel's hand was warm and strong, calloused from years of handling reins and rifles, gentle enough that Sarah didn't feel like cargo being loaded. With his arm supporting her waist and her weight against his shoulder, he helped her to his horse, a patient bay mare who stood steady while they managed the awkward business of getting an injured woman into the saddle. "Her name is Elena," Miguel said, adjusting the stirrups for Sarah's shorter legs. "She knows the way in the dark." They rode slowly through the gathering twilight toward something that looked like mercy. A small adobe building tucked into a fold in the landscape, invisible until you were almost upon it. Smoke rose from its chimney and warm light glowed through oiled paper windows. "Line camp," Miguel explained as they approached. "I use it when I'm working this sector." The structure was simple but solid. Thick walls, a tile roof, a wooden door that opened to reveal a single room furnished with the basics of frontier survival. Miguel helped Sarah down from the horse and inside, then lit an oil lamp that filled the space with golden light and familiar shadows. The room was spartanly arranged but comfortable. A narrow bed against one wall, a table and 2 chairs, shelves holding supplies and books. A fireplace dominated the far wall, with a good fire already burning and a pot of something that smelled like heaven hanging from an iron hook. Everything was clean and organized, maintained by someone who understood that small comforts could mean the difference between despair and hope in hard country. "Coffee's on the stove," Miguel said, helping Sarah to one of the chairs. "Food too, if you're hungry." Sarah realized she was ravenous, that her body's survival mechanisms had finally allowed her to feel something beyond immediate crisis. The smell of beans and meat made her stomach clench with need, but she forced herself to wait while Miguel served 2 tin plates with careful portions. "How often do you find people?" she asked. Miguel paused in his serving. "More often than I'd like," he said finally. "Not always in time." The honesty in his voice made Sarah understand that her rescue wasn't routine for him. It was personal in ways that probably cost him sleep and peace of mind. She wondered how many people he had found too late, how many stories had ended badly despite his best efforts and good intentions. "Tell me about Boston," he said, settling across from her with his own plate. "About your sister." The food was simple but perfect. Beans seasoned with chili and cumin, meat that fell apart at the touch of her fork. Sarah ate slowly, feeling strength return to her body with each bite. For the first time in days, she felt safe enough to remember things beyond immediate survival. "Margaret teaches at a grammar school. $25 a month and a room with the pastor's widow." Sarah's voice grew stronger as she talked. "She's been after me for 2 years to come east, away from all this." She gestured toward the window in the darkness beyond. Miguel nodded, encouraging her to continue. "My husband, James, he was so certain California was the answer. Gold in the streams, land for the taking. He had it all planned out." Sarah pulled the gold locket from beneath her dress and showed Miguel the small photograph inside. "This is Margaret, taken last year." Miguel studied the daguerreotype in the lamplight, seeing a woman with Sarah's eyes but harder features, the look of someone who had learned to depend on herself. "She looks like she'd be good in a crisis." "Better than me, certainly." Sarah tucked the locket away, close to her heart. "She probably thinks I'm dead by now. No word for months." "We'll get you to the territorial station tomorrow," Miguel said with quiet certainty. "They can send a telegraph east. Let her know you're safe." Tomorrow. The word hung in the air between them like a promise Sarah had stopped believing possible. She had gotten used to thinking in terms of the next hour, the next step, the next breath. But sitting in this warm room with this quiet man who had appeared when she needed him most, tomorrow began to seem like something more than wishful thinking. "Why do you do this work?" she asked. Miguel was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire as if it held answers to questions he wasn't sure how to voice. Outside, the desert wind picked up, rattling the windows and making the flames dance. "My grandfather used to say that some debts can't be paid back, only passed forward," he said eventually. "His people helped strangers cross this country when it was still New Spain, when the boundaries were different but the need was the same. People looking for something better, or running from something worse." Sarah understood. Every family had stories of movement and migration, of leaving one place in hopes of finding peace in another. The reasons changed, but the human cost remained constant. The weight of carrying everything you owned, the fear of leaving everything familiar, the faith required to believe that somewhere ahead lay something worth the sacrifice. "Do you have family?" she asked. "Had a wife, Apache. She died 3 years ago in the influenza outbreak at San Carlos." Miguel's voice was steady, but Sarah could hear the carefully controlled grief beneath the words. "No children. Just this work, and the desert, and the people who need finding." Sarah felt something pass between them, the recognition that comes when two people discover they've both been carved by loss, shaped by the need to keep going when staying still would mean surrendering to despair. They sat in comfortable silence as the fire crackled and the wind sang its ancient songs against the adobe walls that sheltered them. "Get some rest," Miguel said finally, indicating the bed. "I'll take the floor." But Sarah wasn't ready for sleep yet. She was still adjusting to the miracle of being alive, of having survived when survival seemed impossible just hours before. The warmth, the shelter, the quiet presence of someone who cared whether she lived or died. It all felt too precious to waste on unconsciousness. "Miguel," she said as he arranged blankets near the fireplace. "Yes, ma'am?" "Thank you for reaching out your hand when I thought no one was coming." He looked at her across the small space, his eyes reflecting the firelight and something deeper that she couldn't quite name but recognized all the same. "Sometimes," he said, "that's all any of us can do for each other." Sarah woke to the sound of Miguel moving quietly around the adobe, making coffee and preparing for the day ahead. Pale light filtered through the windows, revealing a landscape transformed by dawn, the harsh desert of the previous day now soft with possibility and the promise of distances that could actually be crossed. Her ankle felt better after a night of rest and elevation, still tender but manageable. More importantly, her mind felt clear for the first time in days, no longer clouded by dehydration and despair. She could think beyond the next moment, could begin to imagine a future that extended past mere survival. "How far to the territorial station?" she asked, accepting a cup of coffee that smelled like civilization itself. 20 miles north. We can make it by midday if we take it easy." Miguel studied her carefully, assessing her condition with the same attention he gave to reading weather or tracking game. "You feeling up to travel?" Sarah tested her weight on the injured ankle, finding it sore but bearable. "I think so. I can't stay here forever, and Margaret needs to know I'm alive." Miguel nodded and began packing supplies with efficient motions. Watching him work, Sarah found herself studying the details she had been too exhausted to notice the night before. The way he moved with unconscious grace, his hands competent and careful with everything he touched. The intelligence in his dark eyes, the patience that came from years of making decisions that mattered in empty country where mistakes were often fatal. "Miguel," she said as he checked the cinches on Elena's saddle, "what will happen to me? I mean, after we get to the station?" He paused in his work, understanding that her question was about more than immediate logistics. "That depends on what you want to happen. You have money for train fare east?" Sarah thought of the $47 sewn into her corset, diminished now but still enough for a ticket to Boston if she was careful. "Some. Maybe enough." "Then you go to your sister. Start over. Teaching school sounds like good work for someone with your intelligence." The simplicity of his answer made it sound almost possible. Just get on a train, travel east, pick up the threads of a life that had been interrupted by dreams of gold and a husband's restless ambitions. But Sarah knew it wouldn't be that easy. The territory had changed her in ways that couldn't be undone by distance or new circumstances. "What about you?" she asked. "Do you just go back to tracking for the cavalry?" Miguel tightened the last strap and turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about that. This work, following Apache trails and reporting to the fort, it doesn't sit as easy with me as it used to. Too many good people getting hurt on all sides." Sarah heard something in his voice that made her look at him more carefully. "What would you do instead?" "There's talk of the territory getting rail service soon. Towns springing up where the tracks go. People will need guides, translators, someone who knows the country." He shrugged as if the idea was still taking shape in his mind. "Might be time for something different." They loaded the few supplies and prepared to leave, but Sarah found herself reluctant to step outside the adobe's protection. The little room had become a sanctuary where impossible things seemed possible, where two strangers had found something that felt like understanding. Leaving felt like breaking a spell that might never be recovered. "Sarah," Miguel said gently, recognizing her hesitation. Whatever happens next, you survived something that should have killed you. That's not nothing. That's proof you're stronger than you know." She nodded, trying to believe him. "And what about you? What's your proof?" Miguel smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. "That I was in the right place at the right time to reach out my hand. Sometimes that's all the proof a person needs." They mounted Elena together, Sarah riding behind Miguel with her arms around his waist for balance. As they rode away from the adobe, she looked back once at the small building that had sheltered them through the night. It looked ordinary in daylight, just another line camp in country full of such places. But she knew she would remember it forever as the spot where her life began again. The desert stretched ahead of them, vast and challenging but no longer impossible. Somewhere to the north lay the territorial station with its telegraph key and train schedules, the machinery of civilization that could carry her back to safety and family. But for now, there was just the rhythm of hoofbeats and the warmth of another human being who had cared enough to find her when she was lost. "Miguel," she said as they rode toward the distant mountains. "Yes?" "When we get to the station, will you send a telegram too? To someone who should know you're safe." He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of something that might have been hope. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe it's time." The territorial station rose from the desert like a mirage made solid. Adobe buildings clustered around a wooden platform where the stage stopped twice weekly to exchange passengers, mail, and news from the outside world. Sarah had never seen anything so beautiful as that collection of humble structures representing connection to the larger world she had almost left forever. Miguel helped her down from Elena's back, his hands steady and reassuring as her feet touched solid ground. The station agent, a weathered man named Collins who shared her married name, took one look at her condition and ushered them inside with the practiced efficiency of someone who had seen his share of desert casualties. "Telegraph's working," he said, settling behind his key with professional competence. "Where to, ma'am?" Sarah dictated her message with shaking hands. "Margaret Collins. Stop alive and safe. Stop coming home. Stop Sarah." Simple words that carried the weight of resurrection, of stories that would need telling but could wait until she was safely in her sister's parlor, with tea and time to make sense of what had happened. The key chattered its urgent code, carrying her words across impossible distances to Boston where Margaret would receive them like answered prayers. Sarah closed her eyes and imagined her sister's face when the telegram arrived, the relief and questions and preparations that would follow. "Response should come within the hour," Collins said. "Stage eastbound comes through tomorrow morning. Get you to the railroad in 2 days if weather holds." Tomorrow morning. Sarah felt something settle in her chest. Not quite peace, but the possibility of peace. She had survived the desert and found her way back to the world of schedules and destinations, of telegraphs that carried words faster than horses could run, and trains that connected distant places with ribbons of steel. "What about you?" she asked Miguel, who stood quietly near the window watching Elena graze in the station's small corral. Miguel looked at Collins, then back at Sarah. "Mind if I send a message too?" "Course not. Key's still warm." Miguel dictated his telegram slowly, as if the words required careful consideration. "Territorial Governor Phoenix, stop resigning scout position effective immediately. Stop will recommend replacement. Stop respectfully, Miguel Vasquez." Sarah felt her heart do something complicated as the message traveled toward Phoenix and whatever future Miguel was choosing for himself. Resignation from the cavalry meant leaving behind steady wages and clear orders, stepping into uncertainty with nothing but skill and faith to guide him. "You're really doing it," she said when Collins finished transmitting. "Time for something different," Miguel replied, echoing his words from that morning but with more conviction now. Maybe guide work, maybe something else entirely. They spent the remainder of the day in the station's simple waiting room, sharing meals with other travelers, and reading week-old newspapers that made the wider world seem both incredibly distant and reassuringly present. Sarah watched Miguel interact with the other passengers, a merchant heading to Tucson, a family bound for California, a circuit preacher who blessed their food and asked no uncomfortable questions about how they had come to be traveling together. Margaret's response arrived as the sun began its descent toward evening. Thank God, stop, have prepared room, stop, teaching position still available, stop, all love, Margaret, stop. Sarah read the message 3 times, feeling each word settle into her bones like medicine. The teaching position was still available. Her sister had prepared a room. The life that had seemed so impossible just days ago was waiting for her in Boston, ready to be claimed and lived. That evening, as they sat on the station's porch, watching stars emerge in the clear desert sky, Sarah found herself reluctant to think about mourning and separation. Tomorrow would bring the stage and the beginning of her journey back to everything familiar and safe. Miguel would mount Elena and ride toward whatever future he was choosing for himself. Their paths would diverge as suddenly as they had intersected, leaving only memories of a night when 2 strangers had found something worth preserving in each other. "I don't know how to thank you," she said finally. Miguel was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the last light was fading from the sky. "You don't need to thank me. What happened out there, it changed us both. Some things are too big for thanks." Sarah understood. What had passed between them in the desert and the adobe shelter existed outside normal categories of debt and gratitude. It belonged to the realm of recognition. 2 people seeing something essential in each other at a moment when such seeing made the difference between life and death. "Will you write to me?" she asked. "Let me know how you're doing with your new life?" "If you want me to." "I do. Boston seems very far from here, but I'd like to know you're well, that you found whatever you were looking for when you left the cavalry." Miguel smiled in the darkness. "Sarah Collins of Boston, Massachusetts. Schoolteacher. I'll remember that." "Miguel Vasquez of... where? Where will you go?" "Don't know yet. Wherever the work takes me, I suppose. Maybe back to my grandfather's people for a while. Learn some things I forgot." They sat in comfortable silence as the desert night settled around them, each lost in thoughts of tomorrow and the choices that would shape whatever came after. Sarah found herself memorizing details: the sound of Miguel's voice, the way he held his coffee cup, the careful attention he gave to everything around him. She wanted to carry these memories with her to Boston, proof that she had been found when she was lost, that kindness still existed in hard country where it was needed most. "The stage comes early," Miguel said eventually. "You should get some rest." But Sarah wasn't ready for sleep yet. She was still adjusting to the miracle of having a future again, of being someone with plans and destinations instead of just another casualty of dreams gone wrong in the borderlands. "Miguel," she said as they prepared to go inside. "Yes?" "When you reach out your hand to the next person who needs finding, tell them Sarah Collins said hello." He looked at her in the starlight, his eyes holding something that might have been promise. "I will," he said. "And when you're teaching those children in Boston, remember that you're stronger than you know. The desert taught you that, even if it nearly killed you learning it." Sarah nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle into her bones alongside everything else the territory had taught her about survival and strength, and the unexpected places where grace could be found. Tomorrow would bring the stage and separation, the long journey back to civilization and safety. But tonight, there were still a few hours left in the sanctuary of shared understanding, still time to sit quietly with someone who had reached out his hand when she needed it most. And that, Sarah knew, would have to be enough to last her the rest of her life.